Hi, this is Tom Hedlund again, and this is part B of the Developing Self-Mastery and Emotional Competence video in this six-part series on this playlist for my YouTube channel. I'm going to go into some very specific detail now to help you understand kind of how these problems and adaptations develop and what can be done to complete that emotional development and acquire the skills you need to be more effective in relationships. So I'm going to spend a significant amount of time on this, and hopefully I'll be able to help you understand this. What happens is, as I mentioned before, that children have to adapt to their parents, and sadly and unfortunately have a tendency to internalize their parents at their worst, not their best. And whenever there are chronic situations, and there can be a great many, I'm going to talk about several here, and they can be different. It can be abuse, it can be a neglect, it can be high levels of stress or depression in the family, or perfectionism. There's a lot of different kinds of parental traits that can impact children in substantial ways in their development and can produce some of the problems that I mentioned in part A. Okay, so I'm going to, looking at this chart that I'll put up on the screen here, I want you to see this. So I'm going to just say, okay, let's say we have an angry parent. Mom or dad was just so angry. So the first question that I will ask a client is, what did it feel like? What were the feelings that you had being around somebody who was so unpredictably angry or volatile? And they might say, well, I felt afraid. I felt ashamed. And I'm looking for the feelings now, not how they adapted, but these are the feelings, because these feelings have a tendency to become chronic. They're like a low grade toothache. So, I'll carry that sense of fear or shame or high alert, uneasiness, danger, unsafe, and but then I can't just walk around that way all the time. So the next question is, what did you do? When you were feeling that, when they were like that, and you were feeling that, what did you do? Well, we came up with the solution, didn't we? So I tried to be good. I tried to be perfect. I tried to be invisible. I tried to be helpful. That's going to be what we call your little survivor or your adapted child. And those have a tendency to become permanent features of your adult personality unless you get in there and you alter them. So let me give you another couple examples. Let's just say they were unavailable and or depressed. What was it like for you to be with a mother or a father who was so unavailable or inattentive or depressed? Well, I felt afraid. I was sad. I was lonely. I felt abandoned, and I felt like they didn't love me. I felt worthless. And so we asked the question, so what did you do? Again, those are the chronic feelings that'll have a tendency to infiltrate into your adult intimate relationships. And, well, I tried to isolate. I'd fantasize. I'd act out. I'd get in trouble. I'd do something. And so that, again, that's your little, the first one is kind of your wounded child, and the next one is your little survivor. And those become permanent features of your adult personality again, unless you are doing something to fix it. So just using one other example, let's assume that you had a highly critical parent. So if their behavior was critical, how did you feel? Well, I felt flawed. I felt defective. I was ashamed. I felt I wasn't good enough. I could never make them happy. What did you do? You see what I'm saying? There was the feeling, and then there's what your solution to the problem then becomes the problem later in life. Well, I tried harder. I tried harder and harder and harder to please them, but I just always failed. So I just always feel like a failure. So this is like your past history. And this is the stuff that will play out in your intimate relationships, because under stress, we regress. So when you provide the proper stimulus, say you've got an angry spouse, well, what's going to happen? Are you going to get afraid? Are you going to feel ashamed? Are you going to try and be good and perfect or become invisible? Just one more segue that I want to show you just how much trouble this can get you in. I've worked with literally thousands of couples, and when they had an unavailable or depressed parent, some of them decided to look elsewhere. That was their solution to their loneliness and feeling worthless. They just looked elsewhere. Well, guess what? You're in a marriage and maybe there's some trouble and they become unavailable for whatever reason or depressed, and your solution is to look elsewhere. That can be a setup for adult affairs. You won't know that's what you're doing. That'll be a very unconscious but very natural automatic process for you to look elsewhere. That's something that you did as a child, and now it's going to create some serious problems in your adult relationships. So that's how the problems get formulated. So now I want to talk a little bit about what the solutions are. Remember I said, that we're in struggle with our own limitations. These are the limitations. What are the adult skill sets that would make that differently? So we asked the question, instead of mom or dad being so angry, what did you need for them to be? What was the missing need? Well, I needed them to be more loving, supportive, and nurturing. Sounds fair, right? Just loving, supportive, nurturing parents. And then we asked the question, well, if they had been more loving and supportive and nurturing, what skills or abilities might you have developed? Well, I'd have more self-esteem. I'd have felt more important and I could be more assertive because, they're supporting me and they're nurturing me and they're loving me. So I get to have a me. All right. So there's your solutions. We need, the missing need is going to become our self-parenting task. We need to give that to the thing we're looking for from our partner is the thing we most need to give ourselves. So we need to learn how to take on a role with ourselves of being a more loving, supportive, and nurturing. And then that strength or skill that I mentioned, I need to develop more self-worth, self-value, and assertiveness. So here, I'll take these one at a time. So then I'll ask, okay, so if you become more loving and supportive and nurturing to yourself, do you still feel afraid or ashamed or worthless? Well, the answer is generally no. So those feelings actually start to heal. You're not denying or ignoring them. They're actually resolving because you're giving them the medicine and the thing that was missing all the way along. And then I say, okay, so let's assume now that you've acquired these adult skill sets of having more self-worth, more self-esteem, more value, and more assertive. Do you still have to try to be good or be perfect or invisible? And people will go, well, no, I wouldn't at all. So you don't have to rely on those very primitive survival skills from childhood as you acquire these adult skill sets. So let's take another one of these and kind of pull it apart a little more. So when they were unavailable or depressed, I felt lonely, abandoned, worthless. I isolated, I fantasized, I acted out, I looked elsewhere. Those were the childhood feelings and solutions. So what did you need? Well, I needed mom or dad to be more present, more available, and more compassionate with me. Okay, so if they were more present and available and compassionate, what skills or abilities do you think you would have been able to develop in that fertile environment? Well, I could be more intimate. I'd have more trust in people. I could take more initiative in my life. And so you can see those, again, becoming parenting myself, the self-parenting task, giving myself these things, addressing these wounds very deliberately and directly, and then acquiring the adult skill set. Because again, asking the question, if you've learned to become more present and compassionate to yourself, do you still feel lonely, abandoned, and worthless? Well, the answer is almost always no, I don't. And if you learn to be more intimate and have more trust and be able to take more initiative in your life, do you still have to isolate, fantasize, act out, or look elsewhere? And the answer is almost invariably no, I wouldn't. And to just carry this a step further, because I believe we all have some kind of purpose and things that we would like to get to in our lives, but we just don't seem to have the ability to reach, that brass or gold ring that we're going on the merry-go-round for. So I'll ask people, okay, so if you have acquired the skills, you can be loving, supportive, and nurturing of yourself, and you have self-worth, self-value, and assertiveness, what would you be doing with your life that you're not doing right now? Because those skills are going to empower us in a way to be able to do something. If you learn to be more present and compassionate and aware of yourself, and you develop intimacy, trust, and the skills of initiative and assertiveness, what would you be doing? Do you have any hopes or dreams or plans that you could use those skills to achieve? And almost invariably, people have an answer to that question. They may have abandoned that task or that hope long ago. And by resolving these childhood feelings and survival mechanisms, overcoming the limitations of those, acquiring the adult skill sets, we actually empower ourselves to move on in adult relationship in a much more satisfying and productive way. And so I'll just cover one more again. So you had a critical parent and you felt ashamed or worthless, or you were never good enough, and so what you always did was try harder. Your little survivor. And that adapted child, I just want to really emphasize this because I've worked with this for 25 or 30 years with people. Boy, that little adapted child that is there to protect you, they don't budge. They are inflexible. They think that your survival depends on them being that way. So it's a very rigid and fixed and inflexible defense. And so when we acquire these, when we address that, when we bring our adult capabilities in, and instead of feeling ashamed and trying harder and harder and harder, and I think we all know that trying harder doesn't fix every kind of problem that you're going to have. And you become more accepting and self-accepting to yourself, and you develop the skills of more self-acceptance and awareness. Do I still have to feel ashamed if I'm not accepting myself now? Do I have to try harder all the time if I have self-acceptance? And again, the answer is no, you don't. So hopefully I'm able to convey this to you. I've done these workshops. I'll do this exercise in family systems interventions with maybe sometimes three generations. You may have grandparents, parents, and young adult children all in the same room, and we'll kind of go through several of these and look at it. And almost invariably, I really do believe you can create a treatment plan just from this chart and graph for people. You could fill one of these out for yourself. Pick 2 or 3 traits from that would describe each parent, if you had 2 parents, or caregivers, and you work this out, and you can say, okay, so this is how I am and how I got there, who I am and how I got there. But this isn't me. This is not who I am. This is what I learned. The emphasis in all this is all just learned and unlearned behavior. When we really started trying to look more carefully and deeply at the issues that show up in intimate relationships, it's almost always immature development. There are developmental stages or issues where people became impaired, or their growth was interrupted and they had to adapt. And these are the things that start to create the recurring patterns and choreography of arguments and issues in adult intimate relationships. There is a a couple at Stanford, the Pearsons, and they're both developmental psychologists, and they were married to one another, and they started noticing that their intimate relationship was going through the same developmental stages that children do. And so they developed a whole model of understanding these developmental stages that adult couples go through. And one of the things that is shocking that they came out with is once you diagnose what developmental stage a person is frozen or stuck in or skipped over, you can predict the complaints that each person will have of their partner with 100% accuracy. That's kind of frightening, really, but it's kind of comforting too to know that this stuff can be diagnosed, it can be focused on, it can be understood, and most of all, it can be changed. So I'm going to bring this particular presentation to a close. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. I encourage you to kind of take a screenshot of this particular chart and then just identify what a few of those traits were with one or both of your parents, and just walk yourself through the process. The most important parts are, in the first one, you focus on the feelings. It's the feelings, not what you did. That's the next part. The feelings came first, the solution came second. And then there's the parts that were missing that you really needed that weren't there through no fault of their own in almost all cases. And then what skills would have developed and what could I do with those skills? So, and then lastly, to just sum all this up, we want to allow other people to be who they are, but we want to allow ourselves to be who we are as well. We don't want to be forcing situations. And, solutions will gradually emerge as we start to acquire these skill sets and apply them to our lives. What's going to happen is there's going to be periods of uncertainty. I can speak, from my own experience that anytime that I was giving up one of these early childhood adaptations, it was not pleasant. Because that was holding the beasts at bay. That was that was the soldier at the door guarding the storehouse, right? And if I took that soldier off the job, all of a sudden it could be very, very uncertain, and I'd have to work through some anxiety. But if I embraced that anxiety and I started looking for new ways to cope and skills to acquire to address the anxiety, the more I embraced it, the more I faced it, the more those issues would resolve. And speaking really mostly out of my own experience, every time that I've done that, when I've identified one of these and I've worked through and gone through the uncertainty and resolved it, where the old ways weren't working and the new ways weren't formed yet, the most miraculous thing of all is that I ended up in a state of grace at the end of the process. And that state of grace would be durable and enduring for quite some time until I found another one that I needed to deal with. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found this video helpful.